for whatever reason you're getting a new dropper post and you're having a bit of a hard time finding out what's going to be compatible with your frame and how much drop you need to run, well, luckily you came to the right place. I can help you with that. So a couple things you should consider when getting a new dropper post would be how much drop you're going to run, whether it's going to be internally or externally routed, the diameter of your bike's seat tube, and how much length you have to insert it, the maximum insertion length that your seat tube would allow. And that all varies from person to person and frame to frame. But it's all, luckily none of it's too complex. It's all pretty simple. So on that first one, how much drop you actually need, that's gonna vary. This is the most subjective one of the bunch. The sort of common knowledge is as much drop as you can run. So with your seat at your optimal pedaling height, you want all the distance from right below those seat rails all the way to your seat post clamp to be stanchion. You want all of that to be drop that you have. On my bike, which I'm sort of covering the seat tube of, I'm a pretty tall person, so I keep my seat nice and high. So I have a full 210 millimeter dropper post on there, completely unshimmed, so I can get that full seat to frame extension when I need to pedal. If you're a little shorter, or say you ride cross country, it might be a good idea for you to run a little less drop. Maybe only 100 to 150 mil would be good for you. But the way you can find out for sure is to just measure the distance between your seat rails, or your seat rails to the top of your seat post clamp, and that's how much drop you should have. That number is going to change a little bit from person to person because there is a little bit of space that's not quite utilized that has to be above your seat post collar. So whatever that measurement is from seat rail to seat post clamp, and you're basically good to go, minus about an inch. The next thing that's pretty important is the diameter of your seat post itself. Again, if you already have a seat post in your bike, if you take it out, you should be able to see what the diameter is. Most dropper posts that I've seen actually have it printed on there somewhere. Like the KS Lev has it printed, the Bontrager Line has it printed, the RockShox Reverb has that information printed. So, you know, you could find it out that way. But if you have even just a ruler or a caliper, a set of calipers or something, you can measure that distance, and whatever the closest seat post standard, the closest standard that your measurement, whatever standard your measurement is closest to, should be the right seat post diameter for you. There's a little bit of variation in that because there is a ton of standards and they all vary just a little bit. But over the years it's boiled down to, like, I don't know, just a handful of different diameters, and it'll be one of those. Whatever your measurement is closest to, pick that one. That's diameter. If you don't have a seat post, say you're building your bike frame up, you can usually just email or call whatever tech service team of the frame manufacturer that you're running and just ask, hey, what's the seat tube diameter, and they'll just tell you, or it'll be on a spec sheet somewhere on the website. But if you don't, still just use a ruler and measure that diameter. It'll be close enough. They're not too high tolerance. So the next thing you should think about is whether or not you're going to route your dropper cable internally or externally. Most new bikes now are going to have space for an internally routed dropper post. And if you're replacing your post, if it were internal, just get an internal one. You already know you can run it. If you have an older bike and you're going from a static post to a dropper post, that would be somewhere where you might have to take extra care just to make sure that you can actually route that cable internally. Usually, if, say, you can't find that information on the website, looking somewhere around the head tube area, you'll find a hole that isn't being occupied by a cable, and you can just use that. If it's a full suspension bike, it gets a little more complicated than with a hardtail, just because there can be a lot of breaks in the seat tube where it attaches to the frame and how you might route that cable. But if you're on a hardtail, it's pretty simple. You can just run it right over your bottom bracket and into your seat tube. That's how it is on all the frames that I've personally seen. I suppose the other thing you might want to think about is if your bike just doesn't have any of the other cables routed internally, you probably can't route the dropper post internally as well. Like if all your shift and brake cables are already outside of the frame, what's another cable, right? I mean, it's just what it is. And that brings us to the size of dropper post, the maximum insertion that you can actually run in your bike. Now, this is probably the hardest part to measure because seat tubes are not all created equal. Some of them are straight gauge all the way from the top to the bottom bracket, and as long as that distance is, you can pretty much run a dropper that long. Some of them have like weird curves in them, or on the case of the Santa Cruz High Tower, the seat tube stops at a certain height and you can't run a post longer than that. Again, as with some of the other aspects that I've mentioned so far, you can find a lot of this out on your frame manufacturer's website. If you can't, then you're gonna have to sort of eyeball it. If you take a little measuring tape or even a ruler, if you have a smaller frame, and just measure from the top of your seat post collar to wherever your seat tube starts to bend, taper, or stops entirely. And then I would take off about an inch from that, or about 25 to 30 millimeters from that length, and that's the maximum insertion you can run. So on my bike, I'm running the Oneup dropper post version 2, the 210 millimeter one. My frame is an extra large Santa Cruz High Tower. The seat post diameter is 31.9, which is pretty standard. And I think the maximum length of insertion was somewhere in the high 300 millimeters. And all that I just measured with calipers and a measuring tape. You really don't need the calipers. None of it's that precise. But as long as you have at least ballpark numbers, a lot of stuff is compatible with a whole lot of other stuff. But if you really just aren't feeling confident in taking all those measurements, then just go to your local bike shop and ask them to do it. I mean, yeah, they'll probably say, yeah, we can find exactly what dropper works for you, and they'll probably have some pretty good gear recommendations as well. Really can't go wrong as long as you have those four things figured out. So yeah, I hope that helps. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.